And I'm going to start the timer. See you guys there.
See ya.
All right. My name's Nate Manahan. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana. The music has slowly come down, and I am excited to be back here with an office hours. We tried to do one last week, had a little bit of technical difficulties. Who knows what's going to happen? This is the internet world, and the internet has to work, and the computers have to work, and everything has to work. But hey, we're in the payments business. We just make things work. So let me bring up the stars of the show from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, living the dream, working there up in the Rocky Mountains. How are you, Jenny Rickle?
Doing fantastic today. Weather is beautiful. Sky is blue. Sun is shining. Couldn't be better.
The sky is not blue. The sun is not shining, but it's still okay here. I'm going to assume it's probably similar up about 2 hours north from where I am. Mr. Mike Stetzel, how are you, sir? How's life in Warsaw, Indiana?
You are absolutely correct. A little dreary, a little cloudy, a little rainy. I just planted flowers a few days ago, and I love it. I don't have to go water them.
Well, you know, I'm always glad of the rain. I think the rain's going to end because here in Indianapolis, where I'm based, the masses will start showing up. Well, they're probably here today. The Indianapolis 500 is this Sunday. We'll have, 300,000 of our closest friends all going to Speedway, Indiana. If you haven't ever experienced Indianapolis 500, I am not a racing fan. I don't follow any racing. I only do it because it's Indianapolis. I'm not going to the race this year, but a lot of times I do. I think I've gone 6 or 7 years over in the last probably decade. It is an event, and I'm glad it's going on. And one of the things that's going to be happening in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is they're going to be using a lot of plastic, a lot of credit cards, a lot of debit cards. And we're going to answer the question today. What in the world is a debit card and what is EBT? So those are the two things we're going to answer. But we're going to start out. I'm going to go to you, Mike. What is a debit card?
A debit card, for those of you that do not know, is a plastic card, as Nate described, but it will pull money directly out of your checking account instead of a credit card adding, debt to you. And it's something you're going to have to pay back within 30 days. The debit card pulls money directly out of your checking account. You don't owe anything.
So a lot of times we called these, as the process kind of went through, it started out as an ATM card. Then they added Visa and MasterCard, said, hey, we'll get in the game. We'll work with you banks and make sure this all works. So they created these check cards that, had the Visa and MasterCard. Eventually we became debit cards. But then we came into this different world in the last about 15 years where we have PIN debit. What is the addition of PIN debit? What does it mean to have PIN debit, Jenny?
So PIN debit is a feature that you can add on to your credit card equipment in order to truly take a transaction with a personal identification number, PIN debit. So that 4-digit code that the customer enters in, that's their PIN. So that's why it's considered PIN debit. And then that communication goes directly to the bank and it takes out the funds immediately. So that's going to be different than the credit card. So sometimes you can take your debit card and run it as a credit card, but then it's considered within the credit card batch. And then the funds are going to be moved at the end of the day when the batch is settled, just like a regular credit card funds do. But when a PIN debit transaction is ran, it's a completely different network, a completely different path to the bank directly that issued that PIN debit card. So because of that, it's a different path. It has different pricing. It's a completely different network than if you ran something as a credit card, which settles out with all the credit card transactions at the end of the day and is put into that bucket in that category. So that's really going to be the main difference of accepting a card. And a true PIN debit card, it's going to have a 4-digit PIN number that's either entered in on an external PIN pad, or sometimes it can be done directly on the machine if it's set up correctly with the encryption. And you also need to ensure that if somebody is accepting PIN debit with a 4-digit personal identification number, that the pricing is set up correctly on the back end, because that's going to be an important piece to setting up those accepting that card type as well.
I'm going to throw in a quick question. We'll get to pricing and some of the hardware questions on PIN debit, but I'm going to throw a question that I did not prepare you guys for, so I'll bring both of you up. In the EMV world, we have brought the thing called chip and PIN, and that PIN number is a lot of times referred to as or not referred to, is always, to my knowledge, the same PIN number that is on when you're using those debit cards that you're using in PIN debit. But you can now use chip and PIN for credit cards. Can you tell me a little bit, like, where we're seeing chip and PIN and what's the difference between chip and PIN debit? You guys know? Because I just thought of this question. So I stumped them. Look at that. See? Look.
Well, I was going to say, I don't see it common. So first of all, it's not something that comes up too common. So in the pricing world, we really still define if it's going to be debit or credit. So chip and PIN is going to be something that's really, I was going to say, haven't seen it a lot, Nate. I would say that it mostly runs as the traditional cards. If you're going to run debit, it's going to be the PIN versus credit card. But it's not a common question that's come up across our training a lot. Unless, Mike, have you come across that?
No, I have not. But chip and PIN credit simply means it's not going to require a signature.
Yep. Well, I think what we're seeing, you see it, and we don't run this on our direct rails at EPX, but if we're setting something up in like the petroleum world over a Fiserv First Data and our ISO connections there, we're going to see a lot of times forcing over because the bank cards are requiring, they're doing chip and PIN. So if you travel in Europe, from what I'm being told, it's almost always chip and PIN and not chip and signature. And now here in the US, some of the banks are requiring it, and we don't have to, it's nothing you have to do on the back end to set it up. I do believe that some of our hardware connections, I know specifically in Paradise when on those PAX devices, if the bank is requiring it, it will force over. And most of those are still debit cards, but it's not a PIN debit. It's a chip and PIN that's being put through on the EMV transaction. And those are being forced over and being required by the banks to do that when it's at all possible, if there is a capability to do the PIN number. But that was just something I was thinking of. I'm going to go on to a next question that I had actually told them that I was going to ask. And I think, Mike, you're going to answer this one. Can you tell me a little bit what EBT is? Because a lot of times we put PIN and debit and EBT together because they are add-ons and making sure you set them up correctly. What is EBT when it comes to the world of payments?
Great question. EBT stands for Electronic Benefit Transfer, and it's food stamps, basically. And you have to have a card with a PIN number to use your EBT as a consumer. The merchant has to have an FNS number or food stamp number to accept those things. That's something you get set up with your merchant account. Now you can take this EBT, and this allows people to use the benefits they've received from the state to purchase things in your store. Do we want to go in and talk about, pricing and things like that, or are we going a different direction first?
No, I think that's great. Let's go into a little bit of pricing. And specifically, let's start with EBT, since you just finished that up. We're seeing that they have to be on the state. In order to accept EBT, it's only certain type of merchants that can do that, and it's making sure they're on the right hardware and setting up with the right pricing. So let's just talk about the EBT process, Mike, and then we'll talk about PIN debit process.
Great question. Great point. So EBT is accepted only in places that sell non-prepared food. So an EBT card cannot be used at McDonald's. An EBT card is used to buy food at the grocery that you can prepare at your home. So that's one restriction. We have to remember to add an EBT transaction fee onto the application, because there is a cost on our buy rates of, I believe it's 10 cents per transaction that must be added on. If you're doing cash discount, you would eventually, once the account's approved, make sure that only EBT is turned on. You're not required to have PIN debit on. In fact, with cash discount, we usually turn off the PIN debit, so everything runs on the credit rails. You do have to have that EBT function turned on and that 10-cent transaction fee added in order for that to work.
And
excuse me.
Yeah. So on the PIN debit and EBT, what are some of the mistakes, Jenny, that we see? Are there things that we commonly see, things that are missed, that are most common that they may not do? And let's talk specifically about, in our world, what are some of the hardware options they have for PIN debit and or EBT?
For sure. So first and foremost, we have to remember that debit and credit are going to be different networks, right? So when somebody's running debit, it's not going to fall under our Edge cash discount program. So if you do have somebody who wants to accept a true debit card run on the PIN-based network with that personal identification number, they're going to have to pay for that. That's going to be something that's billed directly to the merchant. Those fees cannot be passed on to the customer as when they are on the credit card scenario with our cash discount program. So those are very different pricing scenarios. The debit network, the traditional pricing program, we put them on a per transaction fee. We recently, within right, something newer to the program, we've been able to incorporate them into the flat rate pricing program that we have. So that's something to consider. But at the end of the day, the business owner, the merchant, is going to have to pay any PIN debit fees as well as the EBT fees. So things to think about with pricing. As far as equipment, if they're going to have a one unit, just everything all encompassed without anything external, without an external PIN pad, they can have an encryption done. Otherwise, they can have the external PIN pad that sits on the outside of the counter. You've probably seen them, very common in like convenience stores and things like that. And that external PIN pad works with the Ingenicos. In the Pay Anywhere world, we have them set up with AADs and the Smart PIN Pad Pro setup. So it really depends upon the register and the cashier setup to if they want one unit or two, and then we go from there and define what's the best equipment for them.
Mike, in the world where we're like setting up point of sales systems, things like that, maybe we're doing Retail Cloud, Paradise, a variety of systems that we have. What are things they have to think about specifically when accepting EBT and PIN debit when they're using our non-terminal based solutions? Do they need to add a terminal? What are some of the things they need to think through there?
Right. So the start the starting point is I'm looking at X point of sale system. Does this enable me to take EBT? If it does, great. It's all in one unit. Otherwise, if I need to take EBT and my point of sale does not offer it, we need to run that EBT on what we would call a side terminal, where you can use that terminal just for your EBT. It can be part of that same merchant ID, and at the end of the day, you have all of your credit cards running in the point of sale, your EBT cards running in the side terminal, and then you just want to make sure that you had a tender created in your point of sale system to close those EBT transactions out to you, so you'd have something to balance with at the end of the day.
When it comes to thinking through like the PIN debit costs and then debit costs, specifically, let's say they're doing surcharging, what are some of the regulations that we know that are on? Because debit cards, one of the part of that is they are very strictly regulated about what the interchange rate can be, and that's part of the reason why they're opted out of surcharge programs, and they're not part of the Edge programs when they're done as PIN debit. What are those rules, and is there anything? How is that handled when setting them up in the back office? And Jenny or Mike, I didn't jump on here.
You want that one, Jenny?
Yeah, so what I have to speak to that is really making sure that that's why there's a completely different process when using PIN-based debit traditionally, right? You can't charge an additional fee, and then the actual customer has to enter in a PIN, their PIN code. So it's a very different process than just swiping the card and batching it out. So that'll help define, okay, this is a debit card. I'm not going to have any additional fees on that versus a credit card, and that's where we can run the cash discount program on with our credit card specifically. Surcharging, it's definitely a different bucket, right? Surcharging is adding a fee for a credit card transaction instead of providing that discount if they pay with cash. So it's definitely a different approach to collecting that extra amount from the paying customer. In the surcharging world, you really need to be careful. The Visa cards really, they check the bin range on Visa cards specifically because Visa debit cards have a very specific bin for their first digits of their credit card that identify them as a debit card. And if you start having any type of surcharging on those, and that's where the Visa card brand says don't do that, basically. So what I really highly recommend is keep PIN debit as PIN debit with a PIN pad if they even want to accept PIN debit. In this truly day and age, everything really can be ran on that credit card side of things. I'd say like a lot of convenience stores run a lot of PIN debit and EBT, but if you have a traditional retail or restaurant, keep them with credit cards. And if you do need a PIN-based setup, have that external and keep it separate in a different separate bucket just to keep yourself safe and make sure that everything is set up with the pricing.
All right. And
a lot. Sorry.
I know. And the question is my last question. What have I missed when it comes to debit, PIN debit, and EBT? Have I missed anything that we should have been talking about?
Gosh, no, I don't think so. Keep it simple is what Jenny was just saying, and I love it. You know what? If you don't need PIN debit, let's not go down that road. Should I, as a furniture store owner, use PIN debit? Yeah, I probably should. It makes good sense financially. Should I, as a little convenience store owner? Absolutely not. It doesn't make sense at all. So there are times when PIN debit's good, but as Jenny said, for the simplicity of things, for the simplicity of doing Edge, just run it on the credit rails. Don't overthink it.
Yep. Don't make it too difficult. And one of the things I would say is, in closing this out, is one of the things that brought this to my thought was we recently did Charge Zoom, and we're talking specifically about their surcharging product, and it's a wonderful product. But people are asking, can we opt them out of using debit cards? And the answer is no. You can't just say, sorry, we can't accept we can only accept Visa credit cards, not Visa debit cards. That the role of Visa and MasterCard is they want all their cards to be used. So we have to be aware that make sure you're setting up merchants with the right product, with the right pricing, setting them up correctly. And as we always say, work with your relationship manager, work with our partner relationship team to make sure you're getting that pricing set up and you're communicating and setting those expectations up for the merchant. That will make life so much easier. It's Memorial Day weekend. We're going to be taking Monday off. Our main office, our tech support's always open 24/7, 365, 66 days a year. Heck, some days maybe they're just extra. I don't know. They probably add extra hours in there, that tech support. But our customer service, our main support here with our PayProtect team will be closed this week. If you're watching this before Memorial Day weekend 2022, if you're watching it afterwards, just wait till next Memorial Day. We'll be closed as well. But as we close out, Mike, Jenny, what do you say to our partners? I'll give you one last greeting to our partners and the PayProtect Nation about maybe Memorial Day greetings or anything else you want to say to them, Mike.
Yes, absolutely. Happy Memorial Day weekend. Thank you to those of you who have served and as they say, paid the ultimate price. Thank you to those families who have lost loved ones and all for that same reason, to be here where we are today in this country. Thank you.
All right, well said. And Jenny, I'm going to guess you're going to have some fun times this weekend. What do you say to our partners on Memorial Day weekend?
Just go. Hopefully you have some time with the family, time to relax, enjoy every minute of it, and have a great weekend.
And that closes us in our office hours.
Yes.
We will be back next week on Thursday, I believe, at noon Eastern time. Right here. You guys can kind of make sure, click that bell, subscribe here on YouTube. Make sure you get reminders. If you have questions, you can always jump in. Thank you for those who are watching live. Thanks for those who are joining us afterwards. And I want to make a quick announcement for our Atlanta. The email will hopefully go out tomorrow. We're finishing up some things about our Atlanta meetup here. It originally was going to be on the June 14th. We came into some scheduling conflicts with some of our vendors who are throwing events at the exact same time. So we're going to do our event on June 13th. That Monday night, there's going to be a road show all day. Then we'll have a wonderful time. And I'm trying to get the details all finished up. We'll probably announce that through an email tomorrow. I think there's about 20 of you who have already signed up and planning on being with us. Hopefully you'll be able to make it Monday. But that is June 13th. We're excited to be together in Atlanta. On that, the Office Hours team says thank you and have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.